Hi, and welcome to Homo Ludens, the channel history and board games. Today's video is a bit of an odd format. I recently spent the weekend in Newbury to spend some time with some friends from the Homo Ludens Discord server for a gaming weekend. By the way, if you wish to join the server, you can just donate on Ko-fi to support the channel and you will get an invite to join us on Discord. On the agenda for the gaming weekend was the very much awaited Tanto Monta, which was probably one of my most awaited games for 2024, designed by Carlos Diaz and released a few weeks ago, I believe, by GMT Games. The plan was to record our impressions of the game through the day, as it's a pretty long game. So the setup before we start playing, halfway through, and then at the end of the game to share our thoughts about the game, as we were all pretty excited to play it. Unfortunately, I decided to postpone the release of this video by a week because I expect that it might get some backlash. Unfortunately, it seems that our hobby can be overly sensitive to critical reviews or critical opinions on games. And I will address this at the end of this video. So before you get upset, I would recommend that you watch the video, you watch the conclusion, and then you can write your angry comments if you feel it's necessary. But I would really recommend that you wait a bit before doing so. So thanks and enjoy the video.
I'm playing Afonso V, King of Portugal. I'm going to be starting at war with Spain, and there's a big civil war in Spain to help me out with that. I've never played before, but...
Have you played Here I Stand or Virgin Queen?
Neither.
No. So that's your first...
This is my first experience in this, and the rulebook is a lot longer than both of those. But I'm playing with other people who have played those other games. So, I mean, Fred's already played a whole game of Tanto Monta.
He knows.
So he knows what he's doing.
Conditions.
He knows what he's doing. But no, yeah, I am very scared, but also, excited.
What time is it? It's 10:20. Yeah.
10:20. And we started setup at about 7:30.
The game has been clipped and set up in about 2 hours, I'd say.
About 2 hours.
2 hours. 2 hours sounds reasonable.
Yeah, the clipping added
Yeah.
Honestly?
But, I mean, we're not barbarians.
Honestly, the clipping didn't add much time. I was setting up soldiers whilst he was clipping. We had a good production line going. And it just takes ages. Look at it. There's so much specific things for each thing. There are numbers that have to go in each specific...
Microphone.
There are numbers that have to go in each specific cartography space. It's a lot, but yeah.
So, Pierre, who are you playing? Alex.
I'm going to be Isabella and Ferdinand. I don't know how that's going to work.
So
I'm
you're gender fluid.
Dude, I'm gender fluid, and I'm two people at the same time, and I'm going to be the Spanish, and I haven't played Here I Stand or Virgin Queen, so I'm also not exactly sure what I'm doing, but I'm excited about this, and I mean, so many useful play rates with so little information. Like it's gonna be great. It's gonna be great. I can feel it.
I'm Stuart, and I'm playing the French. I'm playing Louis XI, the Universal Spider, one of the best named kings of all time. And I've played Here I Stand several times, so I, in theory, know this system pretty well. This is a lot more, unexpectedly. So I have the unenviable task of teaching how to play this game. So I read the rulebook through most of yesterday on a plane here, and it's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to it. I wish it was simpler, but I'm looking forward to it.
And you're playing the emergent power of
Yes, I'm playing the emergent newcomer, France.
Maybe add some context to about on that joke, because I think it won't be clear to...
The rulebook describes... So one of my cards is actually that I get on turn 2. I don't have it yet. It's called The Rise of France. And the rulebook makes it pretty clear that France is just, they're a newcomer on the field. We're kind of a little bit of a scattered monarchy. We're not as organized as the others. Certainly we haven't just won an 116-year-long war against England and built the first standing army in, modern European history. Probably not those, no.
And where do you think that comes from? Do you think it's a weird Spanish scholarship that is a bit unclear on what's happening beyond the Pyrenees?
Yeah, I think it's kind of a bit of that, and I think as well, this is actually something I had a really long rant about on the server a while ago, is people kind of not looking back into the Middle Ages whenever they're dealing with anything in the early modern era. So I kind of think they probably just started with Louis and are just looking at the chaos of Louis's reign and seeing it as a kingdom that's trying to sort itself out and not just a particularly chaotic period. Whereas, like, if you go back and you looked at, France down to 1330, you'd get a much longer picture of the kind of organization and structure, and you'd see how chaotic it had been. Now the French monarchy has been consolidating in power for like 400 years at this point. And they're really organized and structured, and you get people like Charles VII, Charles V, who have really, and this is a whole lecture now, but who've really consolidated France into something we recognize much more as the modern kingdom and the modern state. Also, I'm spending a lot of time reading about the period right before this, so I have a lot of opinions.
Good. And yeah, I know barely anything about who I'm playing. So I'm playing this guy, Moulay Hassan of Granada, and I would be spread across 2 kingdoms. So one in the west side of North Africa and south of Spain. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. I played already once, but it was a short game at the Quadboard Emperor Games. It was short, like compared to what the game could be. We played it in an evening. It was interesting. What I liked was that compared to Here I Stand, you have a lot more fighting, and I think it's probably something that I expect we're going to see here. But yeah, we'll debrief in turn 2.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Turn 2.
Yeah, we'll debrief in turn 2, and
Yeah, that makes sense.
And we'll see how each faction is doing on the board and all this. Good luck.
Good luck.
A few moments later.
We're debriefing after 2 turns of Tanto Monta. 2
long
turns. It
turns.
went so.
That's not 2 turns. I'm sorry, that's not 2 turns.
It went so fast, like breeze. What time is it?
It is 4.
It is 4, and we
o'clock.
started at.
Well, we started setup at 7:30 in the morning.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
The game is clipped.
The game is clipped. We
Yeah,
were
I think,
clipping while
I think
setting
that's
up.
what matters. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask each of you a bit of a debrief of what are your thoughts so far of the experience. So, Stuart, where to start?
Where to begin? It's very complicated. In a fiddly way. The core is still good, because the core is Here I Stand. It's a great game. It's a game I really like and enjoy. And when you're doing that stuff, it feels great. Yeah. But it reminds me a lot of learning Here I Stand for the first time, except that now I already know Here I Stand. So it's like that extra layer on top of it that constantly I have to look up everything in the rulebook. I'm checking things. There's weird exceptions. We'll go through an entire phase and then be like, oh, actually, you can't make peace because we forgot this rule that says that you can't make peace until this event has been played. And there's lots and lots of stuff like that that makes it much more challenging to remember how to play it and to keep track of all these bits, and there's some UX to help, and there's not really enough, and the rulebook doesn't have an index, which is also true of Here I Stand, but is more annoying here. There's stuff I like about it that is true of my love of the system, and it does feel with some of that big pan-European political movement, and there's lots of combat, and I do kind of like the Here I Stand combat, even if it's a bit janky, but I don't know, it's real slow.
But and what's your situation so far on the board? So you're playing the French.
I'm doing okay. So the first turn, I got stuck with 2 mandatory wars. I had to fight in Burgundy and Brittany, but then I won them pretty quickly, which helped.
They were big wars.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were very big wars. Yeah.
So yeah, it was the future Emperor Maximilian showed up, and it was a whole mess. So I managed to fight that off, and then I've kind of I haven't really expanded much beyond France. I'm getting little victory points here and there by making friends with the nobles and fighting as control of Castile. I've been holding off the Spanish advance very slowly, but I don't feel like I've been doing a whole lot. Like, I get points here and there, and I'm doing this and that. I conquered Navarre, but I definitely am not doing, like, big sweeping things. I'm very much, like, pushing out my borders inch by inch and playing very kind of conservatively.
Which I guess feels historical. Like you wouldn't go and take all of Spain. Like taking Navarre would be a pretty big achievement for the Kingdom of France.
Yeah, it does feel a bit like that. Like, it is... one thing that I guess... Well, I'm really curious to see going forward is that now that kind of as Louis XI has just died at the end of the turn, I'm now Charles VIII, I should in theory begin pivoting more towards Italy and begin trying to take over parts of Italy and not fight Spain in Spain. And what I'm curious is if the game will actually nudge me enough to make it worthwhile to invade Italy. So I'm curious to see how that works.
Yeah, sure. Maybe we can go to Portugal.
Yeah.
So Pierre, you were playing Portugal. So first of all, how are your feelings about the game so far?
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay.
What was your expectation going in?
I expected a game that would be complicated and that would have a lot of little side rules, but that was playable. and I think it is playable, but it's right on the edge of it. Like, it's become a bit of a joke in the group at the moment, where like we say something and we say, oh, there's probably a role for that, or there's probably a different role for that, and there actually is, and that's a bit frustrating. Like you gave an example of, for one faction, it's like the same role that you're trying to resolve, but for one faction you need to roll high and the other faction you need to roll low, and it just feels...
Yeah, for extra cards at the start of a turn, France and Spain have tables they roll on, and France I need to roll like 4 or under, and Spain needs to roll 4+.
But that's on odd turns, because on even turns it's different.
Yeah, and it's like, why?
Wait a minute, is this a joke or is this...
No, it's not a joke.
This is real. And it's stuff like that where you're like, it's kind of beyond a joke, and it's fun because we know the rule now and it's fine. But it's a bit like... It gets a bit wearing when every action you do has a rule like that.
Yeah.
The narrative that's playing out is fun though, and I am feeling it, and I am like looking at it. We've got a bit of a cold war going on between Spain and Portugal, with the actual Portuguese civil war, with the light blue ones that
I'm at war with everyone, honestly, at this point.
Yeah, but you didn't really have a choice in it.
No.
Yeah, no.
But that's another thing that I think you're probably going to comment on a bit.
Maybe just tell us about what's the situation for Portugal so far.
Portugal has started to go out in Africa.
Yeah.
They've taken the nows, they've explored a few places, they've made a couple of settlements.
Explored.
Yeah. Rolled on a few tables, and they have made peace with the Muslims in the North Africa. So with
we came to an agreement.
We came to an agreement, and that's going well, I think, at the moment. And I'm feeling relatively safe. My borders are pretty safe. You don't want to attack me.
But do you have a long-term plan? Do you know what you're aiming for?
I'm hoping to get heavy into the exploration, and then when either of you are weak, I'm going to stab you in the back.
Okay, good. That's good to know.
But we'll see.
But yeah, so Alex,
Ayo.
first of all, overall impressions so far.
Well, I was here to revel in the bloat of the game, and I have been fully served by Tanto Monta for sure. I do think I like the Here I Stand system. Like I haven't played Here I Stand, but I do get that like this is a fun system, and I really enjoy like a 4-player war game. Yeah. It's great, and it's Here I Stand 6 players. Like finding 6 crazy persons to play it with might be a little harder than 4 person. I just wish that this was a little less heavy, but I really enjoyed the core of it. Yeah. But I agree. I mean, if it wasn't for Stuart doing all of the heavy mental lifting, I would be just like looking at the rule book and sort of like zoning out. And I can actually play heavy games. I'm not like stupid, but this is something else. Yeah. But I do have fun with it. For sure. And I feel like the diplomacy phase was really interesting. When it started, it was okay, this is the game, this is fun. But then we came to an agreement after like a few and then there was a rule that made it so that we couldn't come to peace. Yeah. And I was like, well,
so the only part that was interesting in the game was limited.
Forbidden.
Yes.
Which is like that in life.
I would say that it doesn't really trust the players to have the freedom to make the choices they want.
Yeah,
it really
like
Here I Stand is already a little on rails,
yeah,
but not hugely. And this feels like it leaned in even more to being more on rails, and that you kind of need to know even to play well what's coming and what future events are. And I find myself trying to look up what events, because I know in the rulebook it's told me that like on the end of turn 2, Spain and the Muslims are going to go to war and all this kind of stuff. And it does feel like it is. There's freedom to make choices, but it's confining you into a slightly more narrow instead of just embracing being a big, more chaotic sandbox.
Yeah, so what I felt was that I expected it to be a sandbox, and then I realized that there were so many things that guided me into taking specific decisions. And also I realized that if I don't know what are going to be the mandatory events, basically it's almost impossible to make a good decision. Mm-hmm. So you should probably go through the deck, check, and it's like a lot of prep work to play a game, because that's going to be actually quite significant on top of all of the rules. You need to be aware of what events are going to be significant for you. Back to Alex, so what's the situation of Spain so far?
Well, first turn was amazing. We were spreading our wings, and we did a little bit of colonialism.
It was the seed of an empire, doing a bit of... and you did a bit of genocide.
A little bit, but I mean...
We've all been
yeah, exactly. But yeah, I felt bad, but I had to do it because it was on rails, and I need to do it in the Canary Islands. I'm sorry. But then on turn 2, I was like too glorious, and everybody just started ganging up on me. It was obvious. Like, but I think I'm gonna take Barcelona next turn. Like I think I've pushed enough forces there to make it so, and we actually wanted to make a deal, and now it didn't happen, but I actually made that deal through the diplomacy of weapons, and it worked fine. So, and then Fred, we had like a big epic bloody fight for the canal.
Yeah, for Gibraltar. So it's not a canal.
Yeah.
It's a strait. But yeah.
Oh. La di da.
But no, it is good fun at the moment, I think. The narrative that you're talking about is very fun.
Yeah,
and it's cool seeing that. But it's annoying that it's taken...
Do we need so much to
7
create a
hours to
narrative?
get there,
Yeah,
yeah.
do we need that much to create a narrative like this?
Yeah, I wish we were on turn 5.
Yeah.
Basically, that's I wish we were on turn 5.
It feels like turn 5.
2,000 years later.
Well, I'm back in front of the camera to actually do the debrief. And maybe just to start, we debrief after the end of turn 3. We've decided, so the time is now 20 to 7. So we decided after turn 3 to say that the game was done.
Yes.
We thought that it was not necessary for us to keep on playing. And I guess now is the time for the debrief of that game. And I can see that Stuart is already a bit upset. So I think I would like to structure the criticisms on different parts. I think we should discuss the core engine, then discuss the specific implementation of that engine in Tanto Monta. And then I think it would be nice, because Stuart you have, and Pierre also, but Stuart even more so on the 100-year war and everything, quite some historical knowledge of this. So having your point of view on the history of the game, I think would be also interesting, because I think there is definitely things to discuss in that realm. But first of all, maybe on the overall system, flow of play and everything, I would be curious to have your thoughts. I have strong thoughts, but and remember, do not talk without the mic. That's really important. Maybe Pierre, do you wanna start? I will give you the mic.
Strong thoughts all around, I think. I'm glad we've finished now, I think, is the main thing. We were floating around the idea of maybe doing turn 4, maybe turn 5, and then calling it there. But at the end of turn 3, we were just like, we were done. We were very happy. And we looked at what opened up in turn 4, because a lot of people have said it opens up quite nicely in turn 4 onwards. And it's not enough to keep us interested, I think, for now. But yeah, strong thoughts, but I don't want to... Yeah, let's hear what other people have to say.
Well, I'm not even sure what... Like, for a second there, I was like, yeah, we can do turn 4. And by the end of turn 3, I was like, that's not a good idea, actually. Like, and it's... I would actually want... Like, there's a part of me that was like, maybe if we started again at some point in the future, but no, not really. I don't. I really want to. It makes me want to try Here I Stand, is what I'll say. Like, I've never played Here I Stand. I see why this scale of game is fun and like the little bits and pieces, but there's too many bits and pieces. Like, I spent most of the game concentrating as the Spaniards on the map of Europe. There are some other things that I could have been doing. Christopher Columbus stood there not exploring, because I was like, there's no way I'm going to explore now. And there's like, at some point Stuart was like, oh, and remember, there's the weddings. I was like, yeah, no, we're not getting anyone. There's no love now. There's not going to be any loving done. So yeah, I think it's all a little bit too much, and all of the different aspects. There's a weird thing about this game where it's like, what is abstracted and what is not abstracted is
weird.
So weird, for real. But that's my overall feeling of it. Like, I want to repeat, like, I had fun playing this. I have fun playing games. I'm enthusiastic about even like heavy games that I'm not enjoying that much, and this falls in the category of like heavier games that I can take heavy, but this is just like a maze of rules.
I had fun playing heavy games, but I think I had fun playing this game with you guys, you know, rather than having fun playing this game.
So
I would say, I would describe the game as fiddly and not heavy.
Yeah.
I think because Here I Stand, for all of its kind of reputation, it's not a light game. I don't think that would be reasonable to say, but certainly in a wargaming space, it's not actually very heavy. There's a lot of rules, but it's not that much heavier than something like Root is, honestly, if you're prepared to learn that. It's the 6 players and a few exceptions, and this is built on that same core. So the core system is not that complicated. It's fairly standard point-to-point CDG. It's simpler than stuff like Wilderness War in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so I think, but there's so much stuff bolted onto this that we would just forget about entire. Like the first turn, we did loads with the diplomatic influence track, which is something I was really excited to see, because one thing I don't love about Here I Stand is the minor powers can feel very peripheral because you need to get like the Venetian treaty card and you need to be the Pope or whatever to play it. And if that card just goes to the Ottoman player, it never happens or whatever. I don't remember exactly with the Venetians, but it's that kind of thing. So they can just, some of them can just never fire, and then it really is a bit of a bummer to never see them in play. So I like this idea of trying to make it more granular, but then it's still very card linked. So in the first turn we did loads with it, and then a lot of it was just undone by other card play, and then we just forgot it existed for like the entirety of turn 3. I don't think we interacted with it at any point. And there's a few systems that feel like that. Like sometimes it's got your attention and it's interesting, and then sometimes you just forget it for an entire turn, and this entire turn is hours of your life.
Yeah.
So that was it, and it kind of would then detract from some of the things that I liked about the core Here I Stand system. Like one thing that I found that was interesting and I wouldn't have predicted is in Here I Stand, spring deployment is really big, which is at the start of the turn. Before you start playing cards and taking action, you're going to take one army from the middle of your kingdom, and you're basically going to deploy it to the edge. And that's like where it kind of really indicates your campaigning intent. And you do it in impulse order, and it's a really interesting moment to see like who's attacking who, or who's being aggressive where. And in this, just the way the map is laid out and things, like some turns you guys didn't even spring deploy at all. You were just like, I'm fine where I am. I was France, so I basically always had to spring deploy because Paris is quite far away.
Yeah.
But I only ever went a couple spaces. And it just really felt like a system that was a legacy from Here I Stand that only I cared about. And that also felt like part of the game. Like only Pierre is doing exploration for most of the game. Only Castile is doing anything in the Canary Islands. And so it did feel a bit like, it almost felt like a Euro game at times. Like we were point salad collecting
Exactly. Yeah, we were talking about
in our
the
own
fact
little games.
that it was a point salad where you had your own subsystem and you were making points in a different way. But that's the thing. I think you were putting it. I really like what you're saying around. Oh, there is the legacy of Here I Stand, and sometimes there are stuff from Here I Stand that remains in this, and you don't really know why. And then there is so many things that it adds on top of something that I think is not that heavy or that complicated. Just creates a very interesting dynamic around the table, and just adds so much fluff on top of it, and you're like, everything is conditional. Every like one event out of 10 refers to a specific page in the rulebook. And you're like, but why? And all of those things, and it goes into the flow of the play, and you're like, it feels like this is made by people who were super excited and had a lot of fun with Here I Stand, maybe a close gaming group that played it a lot, and they were like, oh, we're gonna make our own fan-made kind of stuff.
And if you
and it goes all around. In every direction.
And if you have a hand of card that you pick up and 3 of your cards are like some of the like, oh yeah, you need to reread an entire page of the rule, you're just like, I'm gonna use this for the
I'm gonna use it for
ups.
ups. I'm gonna use it for ups. I don't want to open up again the 60-page rule book to find section 20.7.8
It's the first game in my life I think where I'm like, I'm not gonna go there. Like I'm leaving.
I'm not touching this.
Maybe if I don't touch it, it won't bite back.
I will say that I felt like I played all of your turns in the rulebook, and then my turn would happen, and I'd be like, "Oh fuck, I play a card. Jesus, I haven't looked at any cards in my hand." And then like my turn would be over, and then I would be straight back into the rulebook for everyone else's turn as the person who was managing the game, and then my turn would come, and I'd have to do something, and that was like my whole game was just like rulebook, one turn, rulebook, one turn.
I think, and that was because you were teaching so much, and that's why we were playing it, because you took the burden of teaching it. Mm-hmm. But I think going on the point of us sounding a bit different, us like the factions working a bit differently, I don't know if I agree entirely. It didn't seem like they were that distinct from each other.
I don't think they're asymmetric at all.
They're not asymmetric at all. The only asymmetry
only the home cards.
It's the home cards and the exceptions. Like,
yes.
I, as Portugal, can only build the exploration boats in the first 2 turns, and then I explore literally the exact same way as everyone else.
Yeah.
I like, functionally, the mechanics of what the French can do is exactly the same as what the Muslim faction can do. And that's what I think interests me in Here I Stand, is because
you
fundamentally
have more asymmetry.
And you're looking at the game from different points of view in Here I Stand, as the Protestants versus the Ottomans.
And you're trying to achieve totally very different things.
Exactly.
Whereas here, more or less, of course your board is slightly different, but at its core, there are things that you need to have to unlock the auto win, and then you need to put your keys on the board. And it's like, cool. Like,
I don't even know that you need to put your keys on the board. That like putting a key on the board. Yeah, Pierre had conquered half of Spain as Portugal and didn't really do that much. And putting a key out often is just a victory point, which is the same as like any other of 90 actions I've done. Like, it doesn't feel climactic.
Yeah.
It's not like if I have invaded Italy and conquered Milan, which I was trying to do at the end of the game.
No, yeah.
That would be as effective as me spending CPs to raise my influence with one of the French noble families. And it's like it's just this disconnect. Like it's another victory point.
Yeah, I mean, you at the very end, you'd been like scrapping in Spain against me, against the French, against the Muslims, just trying to hold on to every little victory point as it was going. And at the end,
because I couldn't sign a peace treaty with you.
You couldn't sign a peace treaty with me. But then at the very end, you're like, screw it. I'll explore. I'll just roll a dice and explore. And you're like, roll a dice, get a VP.
Yeah, no. There's no feeling of exploration in that exploration mechanic. I don't feel like it feels in any way, shape, or form like exploration. It just feels like another chart.
Roll for points.
And I think that's a really interesting point, the point about diplomacy, because, and that's something that Alex and I were talking about, because sometimes in the diplomacy phase, Alex as Spain and me as, even more me as the Muslims, had not much to negotiate, honestly.
And we wanted to.
We were
just like,
but the game didn't let us to. Like, it's like, oh no, at the end of turn 2, you're going to be at war. It's like, okay, cool. Then, and there's literally nothing you can do about this. And you have a lot of those stuff, and you're like, it presents itself as a very convoluted and interesting sandbox, but there is so many things that puts you on rails. Like so many things that's going to happen at a specific moment in time. And even if it doesn't happen, it will happen anyway at the end of the turn. And it's going to do this thing. And it's like, why?
And then for every little thing that's like a mandatory event that you're just like, why is that there? There's something that's going to be like, why wasn't that a mandatory event? Or why is that happening now? And then you're just like, how did it end up being chosen? Like what was this is mandatory
process.
And this is at this point? Yeah, there's the decision process is very hard to decipher.
I think you have a specific example about mandatory events or sequences of treaties that just don't work.
There's so many treaties, and I can't even remember the name of the treaty, but there's a treaty that's supposed to be signed between Spain and Portugal, and they couldn't agree a peace treaty until that event was played, and that event wasn't mandatory, but I drew in my hand the Treaty of Tordesillas, which is the next treaty, which can't be resolved until that treaty is resolved. And then there wasn't a carve out in the rulebook to explain what to do in that situation. In a game that has so many exceptions and detailed rules, we just had to be like, well, probably you just play it for the ops and the event doesn't trigger. But there wasn't like a specific order that wasn't structured so that one of them had to fire so the other one can happen. But the Treaty of Tordesillas is a mandatory event, so it's an event you have to play for its event, but its event could not trigger.
I like the dice. The dice are nice. The colors they used are nice.
No, but we can talk about the stuff that we liked, maybe. No, because we've been pretty rough. We were just out of it. We decided to give up, so of course we were it's a bit rough. But what did you like, Pierre?
I liked the dice. I liked the narrative that played out.
Yeah.
I quite liked how I'm controlling two factions. One is the Portuguese, and the other ones is the Balatrajeños, I think, who are the Spanish Civil War, basically. So it feels like I'm this not insurgent faction in Spain, but like a faction that has a lot more maneuverability within Spain itself. And then as Portugal myself, I did get the feeling that I'm a separate entity focusing on exploration and maybe focusing on the Muslims for that a bit more. And I really like that dichotomy a bit.
Yeah.
That was interesting, and that played out quite nicely. I felt it's quite interesting how they sit you around the board as well. Like I'm sitting near this western part of the map. I don't care what happens in France really. Until I do, where you come encroaching into Spain, and I kind of want you to do well, but not too much, otherwise you'll win. And that felt the physicality of the board, and you sitting over here and then encroaching on my side was quite nice, and it's pulled off quite nicely, I think. Whereas, for example, the Spanish player sits here, which is the center of the board, really.
He does sit right in front of that bloodshed.
And I think mentally you do get that feeling of everyone encroaching on you because you've got every side attacking you. And that's done quite well.
And we made jokes about this being like feeling like a Euro, but it really is a war game, and there's a lot of combat, and the combat is sometimes very exciting. Like there were some fights where I was like, oh wow, this has happened, and it really creates shifts, and they're exciting, and they're especially as the Spaniard, you're just fighting on all fronts, and that position, like juggling between those fronts, was a game in and out of itself, and it was an interesting game. Every turn I was like, where do I need to push? That is actually interesting. And the sad thing is when you sort of look sideways and you're just like, oh, I have all of this stuff that I'm leaving out, and I can't play this right and play this right, and I would need to make peace, and I can't make peace because of Article 1200. But that aside, I mean, that sort of like tension, like the position of the Spaniards is really interesting right from the get-go. And like it wasn't like people say like, oh, the game gets interesting from starting turn 4. To me, it was like from turn 1, I was like in it, and like there was some fighting. Like the stuff that happened, like we made jokes about the Jerez being too important, but Jerez was really important, and like it shifted. Like there was so many stuff, and you just trying to like punch here, and there was like interesting back and forth and interceptions, and
the maneuverability between of the actual point-to-point movement was done quite nicely. I managed to surround you with Isabella in that fort and whittle you down using one Balatrajenios faction and my Portuguese, and it felt like they were banding together, which feels pretty realistic, against the Catholic, the Spanish Catholic monarch.
I would say that's probably the one thing that I liked more than in Here I Stand. Not necessarily like that Here I Stand is bad at it, but in Here I Stand with all of its systems, the fighting tends to be like it's the wargaming part is lower down the priority, and it tends to be we march 2 armies at each other and we smash together every so often. The fighting in Spain was really good, and it was really exciting. The efforts to try and we fought over Barcelona tooth and nail, and Barcelona just clinging on as the only bit of Castile that was independent, Catalan that was independent. That was really exciting, and you thinking about how I can tie my powers together, but also they're still separate is really interesting. So that interaction was great. And if the game was just this fighting in Spain and maybe a bit more in Italy, it would be great. Like this part of the game is very enjoyable, and it kind of absorbed all of our attention to the point where that's where we talk about that this wasn't asymmetry, because mostly we built armies and we maneuvered and we fought each other. And that was what was really exciting, and it was all about, this part of the map, and then this stuff was kind of like, well, we're using our CPs all in here to do this stuff, which is cool.
Did you really find Italy interesting? Like Spain was. Spain was super exciting. I was expecting so much stuff to happen in Italy, and that was such a letdown for me. Like nothing happened.
I think getting into Italy is so hard. And to be fair, like in the time frame that we finished, Italy should only just be ramping up. But I think if the game delivered on this dual front war and, the fighting between Spain and France in Italy, then that would be great. If it started in this and then it escalated and spread into here, that would be a really interesting game. And I was kind of invading Italy mostly out of determination to make sure that I did it. But it's very hard. And it did go very badly historically. But still, I think that part worked really well. The combat and the maneuvering and the 2 faction split is really interesting.
So I would agree with this. As you guys, I really love the maneuvering and the fighting. I thought that some of the cards were actually quite interesting to alter this. And there was a lot of really cool strategic military decision that I thought was very enjoyable. The other thing that we haven't talked about, but I think that all of the graphic elements that are done by Yvan are pretty amazing. Like it's clearly a step up from like Here I Stand or Virgin Queen. Like those are also cool, but this is like next level. It's a pleasure to look at. The thing that is sometimes a bit off is how different some graphical elements from one another. You see that it's not the same graphic designer working on all of it. But anyway, everything that is done by Yvan, amazing stuff. It's really immersive, really cool.
The color choices are amazing.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And I actually personally had fun with the piracy. Like I thought it was really cool. Like I was happy to have my own thing and thinking about where I'm going to be doing some pirating this turn. It was pretty cool. So I think this was fun. I thought some of the events were interesting, like the historical depth that you had into them. Some of them are really well made. The home cards give you interesting decisions. Like there is a core here. Like the core engine is just so cool. Like you want to play it, but then you play it, and that's where things becomes a bit problematic, because I was really hoping that a 4-player, nice artwork version of Here I Stand in another setting. I was so excited by this, and it was a bit rough, but there are definitely a lot of things to like. I guess that probably I hope that it's gonna find also its public, and I expect that they're gonna I definitely see this being played by a group over and over again, knowing all of the exception and playing on it and everything.
I think there's something to be said about the thing that the system, and I think this is what Stuart said before we started playing, the thing about Here I Stand that you love is that you feel like you're playing history. And I don't love games where the idea is you're playing history, but it's rewarding system mastery.
Yeah,
You know,
and
that
it
feels
does
good.
that quite a lot.
But I was wondering, how did... So all of our factions felt like a bit of an extension of our own, our main faction and sub-faction.
Yeah.
The French have Catalonia, the Spanish have Aragon a bit, basically. The Castilians have Aragon, and the Portuguese have their Spanish Civil War. You have your North Africans, and then your Southern Spanish.
It felt the same.
Yeah.
And I really like this, how asymmetric it felt. Like I was really feeling that I was playing two different power. On one hand, you had the Nasri that was clearly declining power, and you can feel that. And on the other hand, you have the Sultanate of Fez that is like more upcoming.
Yeah.
The thing that was a big shift in our dynamic is that with Portugal, we came to an agreement pretty early in the game that actually limited most of my efforts to actually fight the Portuguese. We had some tension around Ceuta, but that was pretty much it.
I basically pulled out of North Africa. I
Yeah.
know it was sacrificing some victory points, but I felt...
concentrated on
Exactly.
on Spain.
And I felt limited with the amount of cards I had in my
Yeah.
hand, and I couldn't have concentrated in North Africa
Yeah,
while
onto
still
France.
doing a good job
Yeah.
here and doing a job in exploration. And I think maybe that's the wrong way to do it. I don't know. It's the first play, obviously,
Yeah.
but I'm happy with what I did. But it made it kind of boring.
And
in
you
North
and you
Africa, I
did
think.
pretty well.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the appeal, though, is that you have that choice to pull out of North Africa, and then maybe at the end of the game you're like, well, that was a bad idea. Versus in other parts of the game, it doesn't necessarily give you that freedom of choice.
Yeah.
I think that is a great example of the kind of sandbox potential of a system like this.
That it doesn't let the player do.
Yeah,
And
that
also
it doesn't always let them do.
diplomacy. Like I whenever I say there is not much diplomacy on that in that game, I mean, I was on the receiving end of it, and I really felt the pressure. Obviously, like you being able to just like steamroll me from like Portugal was really like intense. Like,
Talking about diplomacy, the diplomacy phase is something I think we haven't touched on, is it? I initially, after the first phase, we were kind of let down by it, I think, a little bit. I think it's quite nice. So this is a bit of a like niche rules thing. You have to trade things that are essentially physical changes on the map.
Yeah.
And that's what you can change in a treaty that you sign with another person.
Or card exchange.
But card exchange is random.
Is random, yeah.
So the diplomacy things that we had was he's essentially giving me something for free on the map, and I promised to play a card for him. And I thought that was quite an interesting wrinkle. And you were kind of worried.
the moment where like I agreed to that without having like a signed agreement, I was like, is he really gonna do it?
Yeah.
And if he doesn't do it, I will.
Because
he
we
will-
were at war.
Yeah. You're gonna suffer.
Yeah. And that was a nice wrinkle because the card I played gave him more troops against the Nasrids in southern Spain, which is right on my doorstep. So he could have just turned around and sent those troops against me. And I think that was quite fun. I do like the diplomacy thing, and I think it would get more interesting as we go. But here I stand as 6 players. This is 4 players.
It limits the decision space for
exactly, and it
diplomacy
limits
naturally.
the deals, and it limits the multilateral deals you can have. And I think,
And I think we start touching upon the historicity of the game. And I think on this one, I think that Stuart has a few thoughts, and I would like for us to conclude on this. Maybe the discussion. Maybe one thing, Stuart, you pointed out something just about the bloatedness of the game. Before we talk about the historicity, the difference between the Arquebusier card in Here I Stand versus this game, I think is a perfect example of what we were trying to say. One is basically 2 lines of text, add that many dice in a combat. The other is actually you can add dice, but actually in that condition maybe you don't add them, and in that condition maybe you count the 4, and maybe in this one you don't.
So the base one is add 3 dice in combat. You must play before you roll the dice. That's basically the whole of the Arquebus card. And here you stand.
Yeah.
And it's an information you don't have in the huge block of text.
Yeah, it's really.
But the big block of text is, so you get 3 dice, and then you ignore cavalry charges, and your opponent doesn't hit on 4s. And if you're playing it in a siege or assault, it's only 2 dice. And if El Gran Capitan, one of the Spanish generals, is present, it does something else. And it's like huge. It's dense. And lots of the cards are like that. They're really dense cards.
it's the same
really
card.
not making good use of a CDG.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I think I think it was a good example. But anyway, this is out. Now we're talking about the historicity of the game. And I think you were particularly annoyed by the way the French history was portrayed in the game.
Yeah. So part of this, I've been spending the last several months to years of my life writing a book on a period slightly before this, at the end of the 100 Years' War. And I've been spending a lot of time recently reading about the end of the 100 Years' War and the early parts of the reign of Louis XI, which is where this game starts, is in early Louis XI. And I found the French history really wishy-washy and weird and quite poorly researched. Like, it had some very strange takes. Like, for one thing, the first thing that happened to me in the game is I got stuck in a Burgundian war, which is fine. Louis XI fought a war with Burgundy. But then Emperor Maximilian intervenes. But Emperor Maximilian isn't claiming the inheritance of Burgundy until 1477 when Charles the Bold dies, which the playbook tells me is turn 2. But he's here in turn 1, showing up, and he'll keep showing up. And it's like,
but
Emperor Maximilian isn't here yet, so why is he intervening in this war? Because he's intervening because he marries the daughter of Charles the Bold, but Charles the Bold isn't dead yet. I should be fighting Charles the Bold. And it's like, it's the kind of thing that in like a really simple game you'd wash away and you'd be fine. But like, there's so much granular history and clearly attention greatly paid to the Iberian Peninsula that this is really kind of weird. And then I was very annoyed by one of the mandatory treaties that we had to play that showed up in turn 3, whose opening line is "The 100 Years' War ends." And turn 3
It is this event.
of this game it starts in 1483, which is 30 years after the 100 Years' War ends. And also the rulebook describes France as like an up and coming power.
Yeah,
one
that's
like
one of the first line of the rulebook.
like,
right?
you know, they're a new scrappy power that's just coming to the scene in Europe, and it's like France in the 15th century, the one that Charles VII founded a standing army for. This is one of the most centralized and powerful states in Europe. Like, they're going to fight wars on multiple fronts. And like, fragmented Spain is in control. You guys have 2 monarchs who don't even get along. What is happening? It really got to me. I was just, what is this take on French history? It's probably a game that is focused primarily on the Spanish history and probably the fall of Granada. And that this stuff wasn't as well researched or thought out at all versus this stuff, which is much, the designers and the people playing it were much more familiar with and much more invested in. It seemed like most of the playtesters were Spanish. The designer was Spanish. The artist is Spanish. So it feels very much like a Spanish production, and that this was the focus, and that's why you get some quite shaky research over here.
Yeah, and we, honestly, to be fair, we don't know anything about North Africa.
Yeah.
So, and that's also the discussion that we're thinking. Like, for a history that you were familiar with, you could see a lot of the gaps in the research. And the thing is that we were thinking, well, of the things that we don't know, how good is the research? Like,
or why
you start wondering, like,
why are Columbus and Da Gama like significantly better?
Yeah. Why?
Why isn't it just that like some of the ships are good and some of the ships are bad? Or yeah.
And there's a weird social contract with these games where you're playing it and you're sort of trusting it to be like researched and solid. And there's this thing where it's like, I hope that it's balanced, but I feel like if you start scratching, you're just like, maybe like I'm being told a weird version of history. And it's normal that like we can like sort of like get into a bit of alternate history, but in a game where like everything is scripted, it's weird that some of it feels looser and some of it feels tighter.
Very tight, yeah. But overall, I think I was impressed by was that it felt like for all of its complexity and bloatedness, the game didn't feel broken. Like it does work, which is actually quite surprising because there is so much things happening, and it looks pretty balanced. So in that sense, it's like interesting. For me, it's pretty much a feat, but it's like, why?
But you were talking about a hypothetical group of people who really get into Tanto Monta and like play it. And there's a part of, like somewhere deep in my heart, there's a part of me that wants to be like
I want to be them.
Like, I want to be one of those guys. But I don't think I have it in me. Like unless Stuart like moves to Montreal.
Like if your group is
if you've really played the other 2 games and you have 2 friends you want to get rid of, then I think this would offer that experience and that extra complexity. Or if you, people who like, because there is a tournament scene for Here I Stand, and there's a tournament scene for Here I Stand, and if you're the kind of person that really likes that competitiveness of it, this does feel like a game that is that focuses more on that competition. And if you know the systems in and out, I can imagine it's a very tight game and it's very intense to play. But at the same time, I just don't ever see myself playing it again.
Yeah, me neither.
Because, like, I played this in the optimal conditions, right? Like, I brought it out, I taught it to friends who I haven't ever played board games with in person. This is our first time getting together to play games together. We play this big game. I love Here I Stand. It's one of my favorite games. And
Someone else set it up for you.
yeah, somebody else set it up for me. No record.
And clipped it.
And clip the counters.
I'm pretty sure they were Spanish or something. I didn't really keep records of that. This was as good as my game was ever going to be.
Yeah.
And we stopped at turn 3. And I probably could have played more turns, but I wasn't actually like having fun. I just wasn't having like a monstrously bad time. And like the idea of going home now to Ireland and like getting people together and being like, hey, I'm going to teach this game again to some other people is like, no, I would just play. Like, I described this when we were walking before. This reminds me of a little bit of when I first taught Here I Stand to people, but it was harder. And when I taught Here I Stand, I didn't already know how to play Here I Stand. I already knew like half of this game's systems, and it still was so hard to teach and to manage. And the fun return on it was not worth it. I would just play Here I Stand instead.
I agree. I've got nothing to add. Yeah.
But then I think we're done.
Yeah.
We can say, thanks to all of you and see you soon. Bye-bye.
On the way back from Newbury, I kept thinking about this game and how much it felt like a missed opportunity. Part of me wishes that there might be one day a second edition of this game where it would have went through a rigorous process of development to streamline its design and highlight what I think makes it great. At this stage, as I said in the video, I have no desire to play this game again in its current state. And I would personally hope that the designer can take these criticisms on board and provide us with a refined version of this game in the future. Once again, that's a personal preference. There is so much to love in this game, but unfortunately for me, the game prevents you from enjoying it. I am sure that the game will have its fans, and it is possible that this game is for you. So that's pretty great. And in that case, actually, I'm quite jealous because I would like this game to be for me. In my opinion, that would be a very narrow audience of hyper-committed players. That being said, if you think that you might be one of them, what I would recommend is that you donate on Ko-fi and reach out to me on Discord. And you know what? I will send you my review copy free of charge so you can actually enjoy the game. Now, I would like to address a wider issue, and that's something that I hinted to in my introduction: the community's reaction to critical reviews. I believe there is an issue in our hobby when it comes to reviews and reviewers having negative opinion on a game. This is not the first time that it happens. I've seen it happen over and over again. It's one of the reasons also why I put my reviews aside for a while. And actually, this is not a review in itself. It's more a after action report, but I'm thinking about going back into reviews. But I've seen people reacting pretty aggressively because you're looking at a game and you're making criticism of it, and because they like the game, because they know the designer, for whatever reason, they react in a very aggressive way when you do this. And I think this is a problem. So this is not the first time that it happens, and this time around, it was the same. I expressed a very minor concern about the game on Twitter, and as soon as I did this, I got multiple pushback, not really arguing against my criticism, but actually explaining me that I wasn't allowed to have an opinion, and that my opinion, me having an opinion and sharing it, was inappropriate. And to me, this is madness. A community that cannot handle criticism is a community that is gonna stagnate. And I don't think that any one of us wants that. That also means that I delayed this video because I was having some family visiting and I couldn't deal with the constant back and forth with some people. I'm not sure it's gonna happen, but based on the reaction I had on Twitter, based on the reaction I saw from another review that was actually posted by Stuart that is in this video, and actually I will link to his written review in the description. I was like, that's going to be too much work. Have some family over. I want to spend good time with them. So I'm going to postpone my review by a week so I can actually have time to dedicate to my family. And this is a bit absurd. I mean, I'm doing this for fun and I'm just sharing my thoughts. And the fact that I have to think like this should give us pause and consider, is this normal? And of course, it is not normal. And I will address maybe some of the pushback that I can have. For one of the most obvious one is, yes, I'm also published by GMT Games. I don't see how that disqualifies me from having an opinion on games that are released by GMT or any games for that matter. If anything, I think it maybe gives me a bit more credit in my criticism, in the sense that I went through the process of designing a game. Actually, I did it quite a few times. So I also know a bit more about how games are being made. So I would hope that my perspective is also interesting in some regards when it comes to looking at games and sharing my opinion on them. Once again, it's my opinion. I'm not saying that it's the only opinion. And the other thing that I would like to address is the fact that GMT sent me a review copy, so I have to be positive about it. This is a wild expectation, and this is not at all what GMT Games expects. When they send me a review copy, they don't send me a gift, they don't send me a bribe. What they send me is a product for me to engage with and share my thoughts about. Generally, I have a more positive perspective on GMT Games. This is also why I wanted to be published by them. It is a company that I love. I like a lot of their work. That doesn't mean that they are not GMT games that I think are pretty bad. And I think that this one is not necessarily a bad game, but this is an example of a game that could have been better. There are actually games that I think are bad, and I'm working on a review to talk about a game that I think is actually a pretty bad game that was released by GMT. That doesn't mean that I don't love the company. I still think they do amazing work. They still release amazing games, and I think my channel is a demonstration of that. I talk a lot about GMT games, but that doesn't constrain me to always think that everything that they release is good. And I think it's dangerous to think this way, and I don't think that's necessarily something that we want. I expect that we would engage positively with criticism, especially if the criticism comes from a place of sincerity. Like, I've literally spent 12 hours with this game, and I came to the conclusion that I don't want to play it, and I explain why in this video. I don't think that the feedback should be you're not allowed or entitled to having an opinion on this game because you don't know what you're talking about. I think I'm pretty experienced with war games and game design in general. Or, oh, you haven't played it enough. I mean, if after 12 hours I don't want to spend more time with a game, I think it's a pretty valid opinion to have. And I don't think it's really realistic to ask for me to play another 12 hours of it. Like, if it doesn't work after 12 hours for me, I mean, I don't think it might happen in the future. Maybe in another setting, maybe if I'm playing with the designer himself, having a great time and everything, that might be the case, but this is not how people are going to experience the game overall. So I don't think it's a reasonable pushback. And to Carlos, if you're watching, so Carlos, the designer of the game, well, I'm really sorry. As a designer, I guess this must have been a rough watch. And I completely understand that. But I want you to understand that it's not done with bad intents. If anything, I actually wish you the best, and I'm looking forward to the future games that you're going to release. I'm still super excited with the projects that you're having potentially with GMT. I know that you're working with NAC Wargames, which is a up-and-coming publisher in Spain that I'm very excited about. So there is nothing personal about this, and it doesn't disqualify the work that is going to be done by Carlos in the future. I just think that this one was a miss, and I explained the reasons why, but I'm actually still excited to see what's going to come up, because what I can see from Tanto Monta is that there is a clear love for history, a clear love for wargaming, and I'm actually curious to see what might come out of this. To all the fans of this game, because I know that there are a few, it's not a personal attack on you. I just experienced the game, and with the background that I have, with my interest and my preferences, I don't think it's a game for me. Once again, I explain why. It doesn't mean that you're wrong and that I'm right. I think I'm right, but it is a personal preference. I don't think that this game is right for me, and I think there are some pretty reasonable reasons for why this is the case. So if you were upset with what I just said, I think you should take a pause and reflect. Why are you even upset in the first place? Yes, there is someone that you probably don't even know on the internet that doesn't agree with you on a game. Does it warrant coming up with wild conspiracy theories about coordinated attacks on your favorite designers and everything? This is not necessarily the case around this game, but I've seen this happening when criticism came for other games. People coming up with wild theories about things that were happening, making up their whole story. Like, It's just people playing with games, sharing their opinions, more or less informed, and that's pretty much it. Don't overthink it. That's fine. And I would also ask you to reflect on what you expect from reviewers. What do you want critics to look like if you were so upset with critical reviews? And I will leave you with that question. What do you want to watch? Do you want to watch advertising or people sincerely engaging with games and talking about them? Thank you.